listening to the Booktrospective Podcast, a podcast for all types of books. And even though we read all types of books across all different types of genres, we want to give a disclaimer. Many of our books and a lot of our content sometimes is intended for mature audiences. And we don't believe in censorship, but we do want our listeners to have the opportunity to decide if our episode or podcast is good for them. So with that, let's get into the episode. Hey, it's Dominique.
And Keely.
And you are listening to Booktrospective. And this week we are... What do I normally say? We are reviewing. I don't even know what I normally say. I guess I don't normally think about it. But anyways, our book is Here Lies a Vengeful Bitch by Codie Crowley.
Yes.
Okay. I already know how Keely's week is. I've seen Keely a lot actually lately. I don't think we have any updates either.
I don't think so.
We're just gonna get into it. I'm going out of town, so I'm making Keely record early. All right. Well, the blurb whenever you are ready.
Yes. Murdered bad girl Annie Lane is back from the grave and hell-bent on revenge. She just has to figure out who killed her. This fast-paced thriller by talented debut delivers a horror-infused hunt for justice that's at once furiously feminist, dark, funny, and utterly satisfying. Between her careless mom, her cheating ex-boyfriend, and her rotten reputation around town, Annie Lane is used to being left behind. But she's never been left for dead before until she wakes up to find her body's been dumped on a mountain rumored to raise the dead. Annie can't remember who killed her, but she'll stop at nothing to figure it out and make them pay because girls like her don't get justice unless they take it for themselves. Codie Crowley's propulsive debut presents a furious and cathartic thriller skewering society's condemnation of unlikable girls.
All right. So if you could describe this book in one word, what would you say?
See, I wanted to say vengeful, and I'm like, that literally is the title. I would say it is... I'll just go based off of revenge.
Okay. I was just going to say wet.
Yeah.
There's so much wetness in this book, I swear. Okay, so general summary. Actually, first, if you're not following us, make sure you're following us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Booktrospective. Okay, general summary. So Annie is best friends. This name is so hard. Moya. I listened to the audiobook and I just can't literally say it. Like, that's just hard for me to say. Moya. I can't. And it's in here. I don't know how I'm going to get through my notes because I can't say
How's it spelled?
Well, I'm assuming it's Moira. Like, that's a name. It's legit. I just cannot say it. Like, my mouth does not. I struggle with, like, R's like that.
And I physically read it, so I'm like...
Moya. I wish I could... I'm not, like, Google pronounce. Moira. So you do say the R. Moira.
Okay.
Moira. Okay. All right, so Annie and Moira. I'm gonna have to stop, like, and pause every single time. Our best friends. They grew up in this really, like, small podunk town. There's, like, one stoplight, that kind of thing. Moira's dad is the sheriff. His name is Grady. Annie, like, her household, like, sucks. Well, her mom is terrible. She's never home, and she's just, like, terrible. She has an older brother who's gone off to, like, I can't remember if it was college or the army or one of those. She's got younger brothers, and, like, she's kind of, like, known to be troublesome in town anyways. And, of course, she's obsessed with, like, the guy who is, like, the worst for her. And her and Moira get into, like, a scuffle because she wants to get back with him, and she's been sneaking around with him all summer. And her friend doesn't want that for her. She knows better. But also, like, Moira's been kind of, like, off this summer. Like, normally they're always together, and Annie basically had to, like, beg to spend the night the last time, and that was weeks ago. So, you know, they're kind of, like, distant, but this book starts with Annie waking up wet, full of pine needles, and trying to figure out, like, what happened last night, because the last thing she remembers, she was at her ex-boyfriend's concert, because he's, like, in a band. So she's basically, like, she hooks up with this like gang of kids who are like basically living in this abandoned town that has all these rumors about like murder and like demons and all kind of stuff, and they're living in this abandoned house. So she's just kind of hanging out with them and like thinking about how no one even really cares about her, trying to figure out what happened and why she even ended up in this town anyways. It's like at the top of the mountain and she lives at the bottom of the mountain, so two different towns, but they're all basically right by each other. And so she's basically trying to figure out what happened, and she's trying to find Moira this whole book, and like she's MIA, so she's basically trying to figure out what has been going on and what happened after the events of that night. So yeah, I'm sure there's triggers.
I'm sure there are. Let's see.
Death, dying, murder.
Definitely big ones.
Lots of death, lots of dying. I guess like implied. I don't know how you would say that. Not child abuse, but like child, kind of. I don't know. It's weird. I wonder what the triggers say.
Yeah. I'm not finding a list of triggers.
Yeah, so there's like implied like child exploitation, kind of like. Yeah. I don't really know how you would say that. Child abuse, child neglect. Fighting.
Mentioned mass murder.
Yeah, there's that. I guess.
Yeah,
that's kind of it. Death and dying are kind of the big ones. Murder. Yeah. Okay. Well, if you have not read this book and you would not like to be spoiled, then this is your warning to stop here. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So we wake up with Annie, because she's waking up, and she is in the river, and she's like, I fucked up. She's like, the last thing I remember, I was being crammed into a club with other people, waiting for her boyfriend or ex-boyfriend's band to perform. She has no idea where she is, and she's like, is this a joke? Like, did they dump me out here? And she closes her eyes, and she can, like, see herself running through the woods, and then she coughs up pine needles. Gross.
That would be so painful.
Yeah, and ew. And she like just starts walking. She's not sure how long she's been walking, and she sees a house. It's abandoned, and then she sees a cottage, and it says the devil was here, and it's like written on there. And she's like, oh, I know where I am. And then she hears some shouts from these like two boys, and they're like, why are you squirming, worm? And they're not like much younger than her, and she tells them like, I need help, I need a phone. And one says, there's no hotline for your problem. And then another one says, operator, I need help. And the other one says, you need the undertaker. And then a girl comes out and says, leave her alone, you brats. And she tells her, these are the twins, this is Hunt and Hal, and I'm Fern. And she's like, hi, I'm Annabelle, going by Annie. So Fern asks, like, do you know where you are? And she says, of course, this is the abandoned town on the top of Resurrection Hill. It's the stuff of legends. And my brother Pete said when the factories closed in the 50s, everyone just abandoned it. But of course, there's rumors about like a phantom killer or a sadistic demon, like running everybody out of town. Fern leads her away, and she wonders, like, what are they even doing up here? And like Fern's hair is like wrapped up in a towel, like, or a silk wrap or whatever. And like the sun is starting to come up. And she says, I need help. And Fern says, I know. And she gets flashes of like her in front of a car and like the headlights and throwing up in a toilet. But Fern leads her to this like empty estate and ensures her like, you know, it's fine to be in here. It's good. And she can't believe that someone's living here. And Fern calls out for someone named Sam. So Annie sits down, she closes her eyes, and when she wakes up, she's not on the stairs anymore. She's been moved to a couch in a drawing room, and Fern is talking to a boy who will be Sam. And Fern says, we should just tell her. And he says, do you want to scare her right back into her grave? And she says, she's not like the rest of them. She says, she's like us. And he says, you know what that means? And Fern says, yes, I saw her holding herself together. And Sam says, well, let her get her sea legs first. And Fern goes, oh, drop dead twice. So Annie asks Sam for a cigarette because he has one, and Fern asks, like, do you know what happened to you yet? And Annie just says no. One of them asks her, like, what's the last thing that she remembers? And she says being at the band performance, and she's like, I just still feel wet, like, from the river. And she's like, how have I not dried off yet? Like, I've been out of there forever. And she's thinking maybe she drank too much, and she knows that's not true, though, because she was pacing herself, and she's like, I didn't do anything stupid, like, with my ex. Like, she was pacing herself so she didn't do anything stupid with her ex. So Fern asks, like, There's nothing else you remember. And even though she does, like, she remembers running through the woods and someone chasing her and having blood on her hands, but she doesn't say it. And then she also remembers drowning. And Fern kind of like pulls her out because she is literally like sitting there drowning in real time. And they ask her again, like, do you want to call someone? And she's like, I don't even know who to call. Like, my mom would just be getting off work. She was supposed to be at home watching her younger brothers last night. But she also doesn't want to call her best friend Moira because the last time they talked, or well, she knows Moira will say like she told her so because she told her not to go to the thing with her ex because she didn't want them getting back together. And also Moira's dad is the sheriff. So she follows Fern around the house. Fern obviously lives here. She's like walking around in slippers and stuff. Oh, and Fern takes her to her room and there's like literal ball gowns like in the closets, and Fern says like she made them, and Annie's like, where did you even get the material or the time to do this? And Fern says, yeah, I always wanted to be a fashion designer. And it seems like she's like talking in past tense. So Annie goes and like cleans up and she's like, there's no bruises on me, like there's nothing wrong with me, but she can't shake the memory of having bloody hands. And she takes a shower, but it's just freezing. And then she panics because it starts to remind her of the river, and she like falls in the tub, and it's like her legs are literally trying to run down the drain. And she's like fighting, like holding herself back, like I'm not gonna drain away, like I'm not gonna melt. And she's like, I am not hungover. Like, maybe this is a dream. Like, what is going on? And then she hears like this hiss and creaking sound, and she sees a face through the curtain. So there's a black scorched face, and like there's like flakes also like floating up like when something burns. And the thing just says, they're not going to tell you the truth. They follow him, the king of lies. There's no truth in him. And she pulls the curtain back, but there's nothing there. So she like gets dressed, flies out of there. She's running down the halls. Now she's lost. This house is huge. But she runs into a room and there's like 6 people sitting on the floor. Sam, Fern, and like some other people. The 2 boys from earlier, and then there's 2 other boys who we will learn is Virgil and Deer. And she wants to know like what is going on. And she's like, there's a ghost in here. And Sam says, yes, this place is full of them. And she was starting to think like that maybe all of these people were ghosts, but like they're sitting in the ballroom and they just look alive. Like they look perfectly fine. So they basically tell her like they're kind of like runaways and they're all just like living here. And she's like, what if you get caught? And Sam says, well, we never see the police up here. And she says, so no one's ever found you guys. And the boy named Virgil is sitting there and he like looks so like snake-like. He says, unwanted guests aren't a problem. After all, this place is haunted. And she says, so do you guys just pretend to be ghosts? And one of them, Sam or Virgil, is like, well, I mean, we can. And so Fern asks her like, do you remember anything else? And she's like, no, just vague things. And Virgil says, or he offers her this drink to calm down. And it's like this sour, sweet liquor, and it's really good. And so she asked, this is when she asked the other boy who he is. His name is Dearborn, but he goes by Deer. And Fern says, you know, we should give her a tour. So they like take her around the house. There's a ballroom, library, billiard room, kitchen. And the twins like come running out and like are calling her name, and they give her a paper and it says, sorry, worm. And so she just gets drunk off of Virgil's drink, and they have like a campfire out in the garden, and she's trying to convince herself like everything's fine, but she wonders if anyone at home is even looking for her. And this is when we learn like she's only 17. And she asks Sam, like, if they've heard what happened here, like, for the whole town to be empty. And she says, like, I heard in the 50s some guy took an axe and killed everybody here, and he was hanged. And he returned each night, like, killing other people, basically. And so, basically, the town got enough, and one day, like, people just got up and literally left. Some of them, like, left in the middle of dinner, like, their tables were still set and everything. And Sam asks, like, well, do you believe that? And she's like, no, it's just a story. And he asks, like, do you have your story together? And he kind of, like, seems irritated. And she says, do you have a problem with me being here? He says, no, just with your reason for being here. And she says, then tell me what my reason is. He says, I know you can feel that there's something you need to do. And he says, you're here for a reason, baby. And she storms off thinking, like, what if I don't want to remember? And then she, like, smells that smoke smell again and hears a smoky breath. And she goes, I've had a shitty day and you're grotesque. So if you could just not, basically, and like something falls like out of the sky, and it's her jacket from that night, but it's like stiff and covered in blood. She had been wearing it and she doesn't know why it would be stained in blood. And she takes it to Sam and he says, looks like blood. And she doesn't think it's hers because like she doesn't have any cuts on her or anything. And he tells her, like, we're with you. You don't have to be afraid to find out what they did to you. They should be afraid of you. And she thinks of her fight with Moira yesterday, and they had been like super distant all summer because Moira had a like kind of like an internship or something, and she's like kind of been like working on school stuff. And meanwhile, Annie has been sneaking around with her ex. His name is Gunn, or they call him Gunn. And she knew Moira would hate it, so like she wasn't like keen to be around her too much anyways, so she didn't have to talk about it. So they finally had talked about it last night or before the thing. So basically she pulled up to Moira's because they worked together at the diner and they were going to their shift, and she had been blasting his music. And so she's like, don't you like think it's a little early to be listening to this crap? And so kind of brought it up. And she tells Moira she's going to their concert tonight, and Moira says, well, you're not getting back with him. And Annie says, you're not in charge of my sex life. And she's like, you're having sex with him? And she's like, well, I have. And she knows that Moira was right about him, and Gunn's real name is Morgan Donovan, but I'll just probably say Gunn the rest, because that was shorter to type. And so she tells Sam, like in real time, that she has to find out what her ex did to her. And Sam says, like, well, we can find him. And she says, well, he'll be at school now. Or he'll be at school tomorrow. So they wait until sunrise, and like they call themselves the Chuckle Gang. So they all like go together, and they all like ride in, it's either Deer or Virgil's car. And like she feels like she really belongs with them. So this is when she's talking like about her family. So she has an older brother named Neil. He went away for school or army or something. And so she's the oldest in the house, but not really, which is why I was like, why did it matter if she babysat? Like her brother's not that much younger than her.
Right.
I thought she was going to have like 5-year-old brothers, but she has like a 17-year-old brother, because they're like 11 months apart. And then the other one's in high school too, or old enough, like not very, but there is another like older child in the house. So, her mom's like works nights, and she's never really home as well. And she assumes like if anyone's noticed, only Moira has noticed that she's missing. So as they like cross into town, she thinks like, I hope no one's planned a candlelight vigil for me. And Deer says that would be like a summoning circle. And she gets to the school and she sees Gunn's Mustang there, but she notices that Moira's car is not at the school. And she goes in, and at first like no one notices her, but then everyone notices her and they're staring. So she goes to the gym, and she sees him on the bleachers with his friends, especially like Trevor, who they also call Trey. Is that the same person? I feel like there was Trey and Trevor like multiple times, and I'm like, I think that they call him that. And yeah, I don't know. I think so though. Because I was like, what is the name? Pick one. I'm pretty sure that in the book they go back and forth. So Trevor or Trey, I don't know. But his friend, she hates him, and she's like, he's such like basically trash, and he's literally like drives a pickup truck with like the balls hanging off the back. Classy. So she goes into the gym, and before she can even get to them though, she gets stopped by her brother Owen, who is the one that's like almost as old as her, and he's like, where have you been? And her and him are like the only two of all their siblings who actually like have the same dad. So they even like look alike, almost like twins. And he notices where she was going. He's like, of course, you only came in to like see him. And he's like, he doesn't even care that you've been missing. He says, I hate you for roping me into all of this. And like, she's kind of confused. And then the sheriff is right there, and he's with the principal and also like the guidance counselor. And they all just kind of like snatch her up. So they go to the office, and Owen's like, she doesn't remember anything. And the counselor's like, Owen, remember what we talked about? Your sister is not your burden. And she's like, what? And one of them is like, we can drug test her. And she's like, absolutely not. And she's like, why do you even care if I'm such a burden? And the counselor's like, oh, I'm sorry, sweetie. You weren't supposed to hear that.
But you say it right in front of me.
You said it like right in front of my face. Like, what? So Grady, the sheriff, is there. And he's basically like her dad. Like, he's more of a parent figure to her than her own mom is. And he also raised Moira alone. Like, her mom's not in the picture. And he treats Annie like she's his daughter. Like, if he buys Moira a coat, he buys her a coat. Like, that kind of thing. So the counselor says, all of your acts are a cry for help, the fights, the vandalism, but this is extreme. And the principal says, like, your actions are basically, like, felony worthy or whatever. And she's like, what did I do? And they show her a picture of her kitchen, and it's like destroyed. Like, the cabinets hang off the hinges. There's stuff like trash everywhere. There's even some blood smeared in it. And the principal says like they believe that she staged this. And basically they had talked to Gunn, and he was like, oh yeah, I think she did that to like get my attention. Flatter yourself. So Owen says like, he did talk to Moira like last night or whenever, and was like, she had told me to call 911, but no one has seen Moira since Saturday as well. So she's also missing. And then Annie's mom comes in and she just starts like screaming and hollering, and Annie just throws up, but it's always like a watery mess with like no substance to it and pine needles. And her mom just starts yelling, calling her a brat, asking her where she's been, saying the cops have been interrogating all of them. And she was like, between deciding if my daughter's dead or a liar, I know which one I'll pick. And Grady's like, hey, like, enough, like, cut it out. And he tells her, you can't retire from a job you never started. And because she's basically like, well, I mean, she's almost 18. Like, I don't know why I need to parent her anymore anyways. Like, just be done with it. So she just starts grabbing Annie, dragging her out. And she's like, I don't even know why you guys want her to stay here. She's not going to graduate and she's not going to college. So, like, it doesn't matter. Like, her mom sucks.
Yeah.
And the principal's like, well, she needs consequences. And her mom says, oh, I can handle that, as she, like, drags her out. And as they cross the parking lot, like, Annie looks over and sees, like, the gang, like, in the car watching. And her mom calls her a selfish bitch and tells her, like, her brothers are traumatized and, like, I almost lost my job. And then, like, she takes her home and it's, like, the saddest little, like, worn down house. And her mom says, like, maybe it's your birth control making you crazy. And she thinks about how her mom has, like, this terrible boyfriend also who even, like, threw her birth control out one time because he said that the birth control was the reason that she didn't like him. You're weird. And her mom says, like, I'm getting rid of that car, too. She's like, I'll basically take it to, like, the scrapyard or whatever. And she's, like, tell her mom, like, give me the keys to my car, but her mom refuses. And she notices, like, in the house, under the dining room table, is Moira's friendship ring. And so it's, like, a sun ring, and she has, like, the moon, I think, and, like, you connect them, and they're a pair. And she's like, well, that's weird, because she was wearing her ring yesterday at work, and then I didn't see her the rest of the night, so how did her ring end up in my house? So she tells her mom, like, I'm leaving. And she doesn't remember coming back here last night. But she goes to her room anyways to see if there's any kind of clues. And she has this bunny that her and Moira both have. Like, they got him, like, for Easter. But now they use it just to, like, hide their weed and their stash. And her stuff is still in there. But her phone and her purse are nowhere to be found. So she sneaks out through her bedroom window. And Sam's already there waiting. He helps her hotwire her car. And he, like, rides with her and tells, like, the other people to, like, go on back to the house or whatever. And she wonders why she, like, trusts him so easily, even though she doesn't know him, but she can tell, like, she already likes him. And her mom, like, starts coming outside, like, as she's pulling off in the car. And he asks her, like, what's on her mind, and she doesn't know if she can tell him, but she's worried that she might have hurt Moira. And she knows something terrible has happened to her, and she pulls over, like, just throwing up water and pine needles, because she also sees these tracks, like, veered off into, like, the woods, and she's like, those are my tire tracks. I do not remember ever, like, driving here. And she tells Sam, like, I think someone tried to kill me that night. My ex and his friends, basically. And she says she was supposed to go with her ex to a haunted orchard tonight. Like, maybe we can find him there. So her and Sam go to this pizzeria, and she's, like, still wondering if he's a ghost. And so she's like, are they even gonna, like, see him? But they hand him a menu, so obviously they do. And she still thinks, like, okay, well, we're not normal. Like, I don't think he's a ghost. Like, maybe he's a vampire, but, like, I haven't seen him drink any blood, so I don't know. And she looks at her red nails and thinks about how they look because her and Moira had, like, painted them a few weeks ago, which had been the first time that Moira had let her stay over anyways. And it's basically because she complained that her mom's boyfriend would be at their house. So they had also argued that night about going to college because Moira had, like, written this article that kind of, like, went viral. And so she got offers to, like, all the top schools and had decided to go to Princeton. Annie, like, is barely even going to graduate. And so she's like, I'm not going to college. And so she's like, well, what if you go to, like, Rutgers? It's near Princeton. We could room together. And basically, like, she just wants them to live together. So flashback to present time. Sam is like, he needs to call the others. And she's like, with what? Like, you don't have a cell phone. There was no phone at the house. But he uses the phone in the diner, and he's like, or the pizzeria, and he's like, there is a house phone, and he calls, but he only dials 4 numbers, which is 1521, which I'm like, does that mean something? I wonder if it does. Yeah. Like, I'm curious.
Why of all of,
like, why 1521? Like, what could it mean? I don't know. But it works, and, like, she can hear Fern's voice, like, on the other end of the line. So they leave, and as they're leaving, Sam stops at, like, one of those, like, quarter machines, and he buys, like, a handful of fake bugs. And so they go to the orchard, and, like, the rest of the gang is gonna, like, meet them up there, and she spots Gunn's car, and also Trey or Trevor's car or whatever. So she knows they're there, and of course she sees them, and they're already with, like, a bunch of girls, including Riley Cassidy, who is their number 1 fangirl and the girl that basically stole her boyfriend and the reason they broke up.
Yep.
So they all go into the maze. So Sam and her and Sam follow after them. And when they like run into them, Gunn looks so scared and then like annoyed that she's with Sam. And she says like, why was there a crime scene in my kitchen? And he's like, oh, you know, that wasn't a real crime scene or whatever. And she's like, well, why was there like blood on me basically? And then one of the guys is like, because there's not tampons or big enough tampons to deal with your PMS. And Gunn like laughs like cornball. And Gunn says, do you seriously not remember? And one of his friends is like, of course she doesn't. And Trevor's like, you got fucked up basically. And Gunn says, I could ask questions too, like why'd you have to go and put that video back up? And then all of a sudden Sam throws the bugs at them from like the pizzeria, but they're like alive, like they're moving around, but then when they hit the ground they look fake again. So like that's weird. So Gunn's friends are like, come on, like it's not worth it, let's just go, whatever. But he tells like Sam, like, get this crazy bitch out of my face before I lose it. And like she just punches him in the face. And then he attacks Sam because she punches him in the face. And then the twins like Hunt and Hal like jump out of the corn out of nowhere and they start attacking Trevor. And she says, I'm the one who hit you, like what is going on? And he says, well, first you make it seem like I kidnapped you, then you post that video, like what have I ever done to you? Oh, dude, how long do you have? And she goes, where is Moira? And he's like, I don't know, I thought she was with you. And so everybody runs and she thinks back to the night and like how scared she was, and like she's like, I want them to be scared. And they go after them and like Gunn looks back at her and he looks terrified. And so she catches up to Trevor, who is a terrible person. Like he has done terrible things, and even though he's bigger than her, like he cannot get her off. Like she jumps on top of him and is like holding him down, and she's like, tell me what you did. And so she goes to like scratch his head, but her fingers literally sink inside of his head, and suddenly she can see things from like his point of view. So it's the night of like the concert and everything or whatever, and the boys are hiding in like a bush outside of Annie's driveway, and like Moira's pulling up, and Annie comes out crying. She's wearing the same outfit that she had on that night, and Moira like sees the guys or whatever, and she's like, what are you doing here? And Gunn's like, oh, I'm here to see my girl. And she's like, she's not your anything. And Gunn says, Riley knows what will happen as soon as we get back together, like it's not serious with her. And one of the friends is like, yeah, just have a drink with him, Annie. But Annie goes in her house, but as she tries to shut the door, like Trevor puts his hand up and like blocks it basically. But Trevor's able to like get her hands off of him in real time, so she can't see anything else. And he starts to like get on top and like starts pulling her hair, but Sam shows up and has a knife at his throat, and he's like, no, stop, like it's not that serious. And Sam's like, nope. And he like slices like a small line across his throat, so like it just barely bleeds. And Sam says, listen to me or I promise you'll die tonight. Now tell her what you did. And Trevor says, it wasn't supposed to be this huge mess. And all of a sudden like a black beast just like jumps out of the corn, and Sam like drags her away, but like the guys, Trevor and them, like don't seem to see this monster. Only her and Sam can see it. And she's like, should we call animal control, like as they're running? And Sam's like, I don't know that they're gonna like do anything or whatever. And she realizes like those were just after us, and she's like, I know why. And she realizes back at the house that all of them are dead, and so is she. So she looks at Sam and she realizes like he looks so old fashioned, like he's so outdated. The way that they talk is so outdated. And she snaps saying like, when were you going to tell me? And Deer says, the last time we told someone, they really didn't take it well. And she's like, does it look like I'm taking it well? And she's like, what were those things? And they're like, you know, we call them hellhounds. They chase you because we're not supposed to be here anymore. So she like gets in her car and just speeds off. And like she shuts her eyes. And like when she does that, she's able to like kind of teleport like ahead a little bit. But she like drives all over town and she cannot leave. So she is basically stuck to this town. So she wonders like, will people always be able to see her, or like will she eventually fade away? But then all of a sudden like another hellhound pops out of nowhere and like attacks her. But when she gets to the diner, they disappear. So she goes in and her boss is there. His name is Leo, and he's like shocked to see her. And she asks like where Moira is, and he says, the last time I saw her, like you guys were together basically. And there's a group of girls in the diner, and they're like whispering about her and like saying something about, oh, she posted that. And the other one's like, yeah, that's why he posted her nudes. And then like they stop talking when she like looks over there. And Leo says like, oh, well, it's good that you guys made up or whatever. And she's like, well, how would you know that? The last time that we were together here, we were fighting because they worked after they got into that fight and they like wouldn't even talk to each other. And he's like, oh, like I saw that Moira posted a picture on Instagram, and she's like, I didn't know that because I lost my phone. So he pulls out his phone, and it's a picture of them from like New York City. It's an old picture, but the caption says, check my rabbit. And so like she starts like scrolling on his phone because she's like, okay, I don't have any like Leo followers. Like he's not following me. And like his entire timeline is like 20 and under girls. He's disgusting.
Yeah.
And he like snatches his phone back because he's like, give me my phone or whatever. And she kind of like looks at that group of girls and like hisses at them and then like smiles, and she goes to the bathroom and she finds a girl in there. Her name is Faith, and she like closes her eyes like as she's coming in, and then immediately she's like right in front of the girl, and she grabs her phone and grabs Grace and is like, show me your phone. And the last she like pulls up her own Instagram page, and the last video is one she took the night of the concert or whatever. So Gunn was basically trying to hook up with her, and they're like in the bathroom, I think at the diner, and she's like telling him no, and she says, beg me if Riley doesn't matter. And she's like, if you don't get on your knees, you'll never touch me again. So he does it, and he's like begging and saying he's sorry, and then she goes, nah. And then she posts the video and like walks off. And Faith is like, while she's doing this, she's like, Annie, your eyes. And she looks in the mirror, and her eyes are like completely black, and she's got like veins, and she just like throws up. So the girl runs out of there. And she remembers leaving the bar at the concert. Like, she had went outside because it was just, like, a lot going on or whatever. And so she ran to this guy outside. She didn't know him. His name was Eric. And, like, she bummed a cigarette from him. And he's like, oh, you don't look like you're in high school. Vomit.
Yuck.
And while she was out there, she looked over to Gunn's car and noticed it was, like, moving a bit. And she goes over there, and it's Riley and Gunn hooking up. Even though he swore, like, and this is pre that video. So then after that, like, she punches the car and goes back inside. And so it took, like, for a whole nother band to finish their set before he even texted her. And at that point, she had gotten drunk. And that's when she was like, meet me in the bathroom, basically. And she made that video and posted it. So she thinks like, oh, I must have called Moira like right after that or whatever. And so the comments on the videos are like, oh, LOL, this is why he leaked her nudes. And it's like, oh, small tits, haha, like a whole bunch of childish stuff. So then she sees the pictures, and basically Gunn has posted all of like the nudes that she had ever sent him. And like, she's 17 now, but like some of these, like, she was even younger in, and she's like, this is illegal. Like, this is a crime. On top of the fact that like, this is a small town that they all have grown up in. And like, these are all people that she's grown up with, and like, none of them have any like remorse or like care about her at all. So she like dials the number because she had written the number down that that Sam dialed like on her arm with a marker. So she calls, and the boys answer, and they're like, you know, this is the underworld hotline or something like that. And she is kind of like asking about the girl that she had been seeing, the smoky whatever. And they're like, that's not a friend. So as she's like wandering around, like, another beast pops out and it bites her, but she gets away, and there's no like bite or anything on her. So she's like, okay, well then, like, why are they scared of them? So she gets back to the house and no one's there, but she can smell that smoky smell again, and she sees her, and the figure just like walks off and heads toward the river. So she follows, and she can remember the feeling of like a knife under her ribs. And I was like, this was my first guess, which was wrong. And so then she sees her body, and she just throws up again. And she remembers like being stabbed and like held under the water. And so she goes back to the house and she calls out for everyone. And Virgil's like, we can hear you. And she says, where is Sam? And he's like, where are your manners? But he takes her to Sam. And she notices like Virgil has a snake tattoo, and it's like moving on his arm as well. But she finds Sam, and he kind of like grabs her, and she just kind of like breaks down, and like he comforts her. And Sam tells her like, you didn't deserve this, even though she feels like she did. And he apologizes for not telling her like that she was dead. And we learn that Sam has actually been dead for 66 years. And she asks like, are we ghosts? And he says, as long as your body stays on this mountain, you won't, quote unquote, die. He's like, we're corporeal, basically. And he tells her like, you know, we can't leave the town. And so she asks about the dogs or the hellhounds, and he says they come out at night, and they're only like in the town area, but they can't cross water. And like, if you go into like lighted areas or whatever, they like go away. But he's like, don't let them catch you, basically. And she realizes what she wants is vengeance. And so she like realizes she does have like these powers, like she can kind of teleport. And like when her and her mom had got into it, when she dragged her home, she kind of like cracked her mom's counter or whatever. And he says, yeah, when we get worked up, we go like full ghoul. And he says, what we are has something to do with the way that you were murdered, unjust, unfair. And she wonders if anyone had ever looked at her. Like, she wonders if anyone would have ever even looked for her if she hadn't died here. And, like, because if she hadn't died here, she wouldn't even be a ghost like here. She would be just gone onto the, like, other side. So she tells Sam about the boys hiding in the bushes that night, and he asks if she thinks it was them, and she says yes. But she's like, I don't know if they killed me, though. Like, she doesn't really think, like, Gunn has that in him. And she's like, I was, like, overkilled. I was tied to a tree in the river, and I was, like, stabbed. And so they plan a funeral for her, and, like, Sam's basically like, we don't want your body to leave the mountain, or you'll disappear, obviously. So they get dressed up, and she asks Fern, like, why is this happening, and, like, why in this town? And Fern just kind of says, like, it's a weird formula, like, it just kind of happens, basically. And they, like, walk through town, and there's literally, like, ghosts everywhere, like, not just the normal people. And they go to the town church, and, like, it's, like, ransacked. The crucifixes are, like, all turned upside down, and, like, it actually makes her feel, like, less serious about this whole thing. And Sam says, of course you're late to your own funeral. And she's, like, asking, like, about all the ghosts, and he's like, it's close to Halloween. This is kind of like a Halloween party for them, and, like, the dead like to party. And they literally have her body, like, in a coffin, and Virgil plays the guitar and sings, and, like, they all kind of, like, pay their respects to her body. And then they bury her in the cemetery, and she makes her own epitaph, and she just writes, here lies a vengeful bitch. And she keeps thinking, like, who killed me, basically, and, like, Gunn doesn't fit the, like, the picture, basically. But she really doesn't think it's anyone that she's, like, been considering. Like, none of his friends. She doesn't think it's Moira. But she's, like, she also thinks, like, whoever did this, it probably wasn't their first kill. So she starts looking up murders in this town, and, like, she comes up on this one from 1999 named Codie. And basically it was kind of, like, deemed an accident, and, like, first it was a runaway, but then they found her body, and, like, they never did anything with it. It was never solved. And so she's, like, she kept Faith's phone, I guess, from, like, the diner, like, or wherever she, like, found it. Yeah. And so she's kind of, like, showing Sam, like, phones, because obviously he died a long time ago. And so Sam takes her, like, out to the cemetery, and there's, like, music coming from this, like, tomb, and there's, like, a ghost band, like, playing, so they're, like, flirting and dancing, and she can tell he, like, really likes her, and they kiss, and, like, when she, like, releases, his hair is literally on fire, and she realizes that must be, like, how he died, like, something related to fire. And they kind of, like, hang out and fall asleep. And when she wakes up, that girl is there again, the smoky one. And so she slips out from Sam, and she follows her to this, like, general store that's, like, completely frozen in time from when it closed. And she sees this picture on the wall, and it says, the devil is here. And it's a picture of Sam. And it says, Brian Ackerson killed 5 girls and was executed and resurrected. All that aid in the devil's work will be punished by God's wrath. And she looks at the girl, and the girl's just, like, smiling. And she, like, leaves grabbing the picture, and, like, when she goes back, Sam is gone. So she gets in her car, and she's, like, driving, and she's just remembering the first thing that girl had ever said to her, which was, like, they won't tell you the truth. They follow him, the king of lies. And she's like, maybe he's a phantom serial killer, and he just wanted her to stay clueless. But then she's like, well, what's this girl's MO? Like, is this true? She doesn't really know. So she calls Moira, because that's the only person that could help her, but she doesn't get an answer. And she drives for hours, and she just cries, and then she closes her eyes, and she is kind of, like, flashing back to when she was with Moira, and they were 13. And they were, like, out in, like, their, like, little shed. They call it the dead shed. And they were playing with the Ouija board, and, like, the planchette was, like, moving to yes, saying that someone was there. And Moira asks, like, where was her mom? And it spells out Virginia. And she asks, is her mom happy there? And it says no. And she was like, will my dad be sheriff? And it says yes. And she asks, like, will we rob a bank together, meaning her and Annie? And it says no. And it's like, she's like, well, then what will we do together? And it spells out die. And then she's like, well, how are we going to die? Or Annie's like, how are we going to die? And Moira's, like, starting to get freaked out, but Annie wants to know. And it spells out murder. And Moira's like, okay, I'm done. But then, like, the planchette just starts going crazy, and it's spelling out get him over and, like, over again. So back in present time, Leo's, like, knocking on the car door and, like, waking her up or whatever. And she asks, like, hey, did you know this, like, Codie girl that died or whatever? But Leo's actually not from around here, so she knew that. So she goes, and there's, like, this town carnival or something. And she finds Trevor and another one, the boys, Darren, on the Gravitron, which means they are stuck in place. As we all know.
I love this part.
As we all know. So she goes over to them and says, did you do it? And they're like, oh my God, you're a demon. And, like, I think there's, like, another guy in there, and I don't know if they can't see her or what, because they're like, do you not see her? Mm-hmm. And, like, she obviously, like, looks all, like, ghouly and freaky. And she's like, where is Moira? And they're like, we didn't do anything to her. If something happened to her, it's your fault, because they said, like, you guys got in a fight again that night. And she closes her eyes, And when she opens her eyes again, because she kind of like flashes back, remembering that, they're gone. But she does run into Riley Cassidy. And she says, basically, like, what did you do after you were, like, hooking up with Gunn? And Riley can't not believe, like, she's, like, coming after her. Because she's like, after what Gunn did to you, like, why do you have a beef with me, basically? And they kind of, like, she's, like, slamming her. Like, it's a fight. And she's like, I'm sorry. Like, I didn't know that he would do that. And Riley admits that she reposted the video. So at some point in time, Annie posts the video of him begging. It gets deleted. And now Riley says that she somehow got Annie's phone and reposted it. And she's like, so I'm basically the reason that he posted your nudes. So, like, Annie's, like, slamming her into the ground, and she's like, I'm sorry. She's like, I found your phone in his car. And Annie's like, what? Because she doesn't remember ever being in his car, and so he had her phone and her purse. And she's like, did you find anything of Moira's? And Riley says no. And so she gives Annie her phone, and she's like, your bag is still in his car. So she starts, like, walking towards his car because it's out there, and someone grabs her, and it's Grady. And he's like, are you crazy? Like, what is it going to take for you to stop messing with this boy? And she's like, he has my bag. And her mom had they showed up because her mom had reported her car missing, which Grady told her to, like, lock the car down. So this is all kind of his thing. And he's like, what is going on? But she just starts throwing up again and says, Grady, he did something to me that night. And he agrees, like, you know, we're going to get the bag. And she asks about Moira, and he says, like, she's really not with you. And she tells him about, like, the Instagram post. And he says, well, she's been mad at me because, like, he kind of wasn't comfortable with her, like, going off to college in these big cities or whatever. So her and Grady go to the diner, and Sam's there, and all she can think about is that photo. And she tells Grady, like, because Sam comes over, and she's like, oh, Sam's training to be an actor. We're practicing Grease, because, like, he talks like he's from the 50s. And Grady actually, like, laughs with him, and so she's like, of course, Grady likes the one guy that's a serial killer for me. Like, of course, that works. And Grady's like, oh, are you going to, like, college? He's like, no, I don't like institutions. And Sam tells him he's from Coney Island, and he's 18. And she tells Grady, like, stop interrogating him. And he's like, well, then what do you want to talk about? And she's like, are there any murderers in town? And he's like, I don't want to talk about that. And so Sam just starts, like, admiring Grady's gun. And she says, like, oh, well, I heard you were more of an axeman. And he's like, where did you hear that, Sam? And Grady says, what's going on here? And she just says, I have terrible taste in men. And Sam says, so you just believe it, just like that? And she says, I don't even know you. And Sam says, you have more needles than a Christmas tree. And she tells Sam, I need to get out of here, because Grady gets up and goes to the counter, and he's like, wow, first you accused me of murder, now you want me to get you out of here. But he agrees, and so she goes, like, to the back towards the bathrooms and sneaks out the back door, and he's out there on his motorcycle. And she thinks about how, like, riding with him, she thinks about how Fern says, like, the dead don't dream. So she knows, like, she wasn't dreaming when she was, like, thinking back on her and Moira playing with the Ouija board. So she thinks about, like, the caption on that picture, which says, check the rabbit. And she realizes that she really needs to go check the rabbit, which I was like, duh.
Would have been the first thing I did.
I know. Well, apparently Moira calls her rabbit, but I'm like, okay, no. I would have went to go check the freaking rabbit. Yeah. Like, no. So she goes to the dead shed, and it's locked, which is weird. There's never been a lock on it. And so she's like, okay. And Sam's like, are you good? And she's like, no. And she's like, did you kill those girls? And he says, no. Like, there was a crazy preacher in town. I stood up against him, and he made me out to be, like, the devil. But then all of a sudden, this hellhound pops out, and so it just starts chasing him, and so she runs to her house. And, like, she runs in, and her brothers are there, and Owen's like, you still look like shit. And Cooper is the younger brother, and he's like, I saw you kissing your boyfriend. And she's like, I never would have kissed him that night. Like, what are you talking about? But her mom comes out, and she's like, what are you even doing here? And she's like, I live here. And she tells her mom, like, look, Gunn posted those pictures of me. And her mom's like, you never take accountability. Like, what did you do to him to make him post those pictures? Why did you take them in the first place? And then she's like, you know what? I'm just sick of your shit. Like, just get out of here. Don't come back or whatever. But Owen stands up for her and is like, Mom, think about how much of your shit, like, we have to deal with, basically. So her mom just, like, walks off. And she's, like, still thinking, like, why would I have been kissing Gunn? And she's like, did they really let Moira, like, just go that night? So she texts Gunn, and she's like, I need to see you. And he immediately responds, and he's like, is your boyfriend gonna jump me? And she's like, no. And he's like, okay, on my way. Like, absolutely not. But she fixes herself up, puts some lipstick on, and she puts her, like, bloody jacket on and, like, walks to meet him, and she gets in the car with him. And she knows, like, I might kill him tonight. And so he says, your fight with Riley was hot. And he asks, like, where are we going? And she doesn't tell him, but then she just keeps making him go, like, faster and faster. Like, she's using her power. And she asks, like, did you do it? And he just starts panicking. And he says, I was worried, or he's like, I told you not to put the video up. And she says, you murdered me over that video? And he says, what? No, I just put the photos up. And he's like, we agreed. And she's like, I would never agree with you, Gunn. And he admits basically that they drugged her that night. Her and Moira too, I believe. Basically because he wanted her to forget what she saw with him and Riley so that he could get back together with her. You disgusting individual.
Yep.
You're disgusting. And he says, you started kissing me after, like, you got, like, really messed up, and that pissed Moira off, so she, like, left, basically. And he says, you started acting all crazy, you were, like, climbing on the cabinets, and you cut yourself on broken glass. And she just keeps saying, like, what did you do? And he's like, then you threw up, and we wanted you to get food, but there wasn't any in the house, so we took you to the diner, which they call the die because the N and the R are, like, the neon sign is out, so they call it the die. And he's like, we took you to the diner, but then you went in the bathroom, and you wouldn't come out, so we left you there. And she's like, can tell that he's telling the truth. And she says, you just left me there. With who? And he's like, nobody was there but Leo. And she's like, I should have known. Because she's like, Leo was always weird. He gave them pet names. He called Moira Red and called her Cherry, I believe, or something like that. Cherry and something. I don't know. He gave them like weird pet names. And then she saw all the stuff in his phone. And Gunn just says, I'm sorry. And she says, no, you're not, but you will be. And she says, do you know what he did to me? He stabbed me, drowned me, killed me. And Gunn just says, I'm so sorry, Annie. And, like, she makes him crash, like, into the river, basically. And then she just gets out and leaves him. And she walks to the diner. And Leo doesn't hear her sneaking in and grabbing a knife. And he panics and, like, burns himself. And he's like, are those contacts in your eyes? And there is a waitress in the diner, but she could care less. And she says, what kind of man calls girls cherry and red and follows, like, only young girls basically on social media? And he's like, well, they post those photos, like, I'm not looking for them. Like, you're disgusting.
The fact that you only follow them.
Yeah, like, okay, well, you could not follow them, so there's that. So he tries to run, and she says, stop acting like you don't know. And she, like, allows her face to, like, fully contort into, like, ghoul, basically. And she says, Annie is dead. And he's confused, and she says, why did you do it? And he's like, no, like, I didn't do anything. He's like, I called Grady when they left you here. And now she remembers Grady coming in to get her. And she thinks back to the tire marks. Her and Moira's cars have the same tires because whenever he buys her something, he buys Annie something. And so those tire marks were because Grady had been driving Moira's car that night. And she knows where to find Moira. She thinks back to the Ouija board because the other thing it kept saying was right here, right here. So she goes to the dead shed and she's like knocking and she hears her voice say, right here, Annie. But she knows like it's not good. So she goes in and she's basically like rolled up and like just dead on the floor. And there's a bullet hole above her eye. And she realizes like she didn't die on the mountain. So Moira's not coming back. And like she's just like bawling, crying, and then like her rabbit falls off the futon and she finds a note inside with a key and it says, if I go missing, Dad killed Katie. So she unlocks this like lockbox and it's full of evidence. So her dad, Grady, was Katie's boyfriend and they had been fighting the night that Katie went missing. And there's also like a flash drive, Katie's bracelet, letters from Katie to Grady about like he basically didn't want Katie to go off to college, like just like he didn't want Moira. And he also had harassed Katie's mom like after he became a police officer. But like there's something also tied there like with Moira's real mom. And so basically Annie realizes that the reason that Moira was distant all summer was because she was researching whether or not her dad was a murderer. And then she remembers the whole thing. Grady came and got her and he like put her in the car and he just kept saying, I can't believe you keep going with that boy. Like I told your mom to keep you away. And then he slams her head into the dashboard and pulls his gun out in her face. And she knew he would kill her. And so she like kicked him and like the car started swerving. He like pulled out his hunting knife and like stabbed her in her shin. But she was able to get out and run through the woods, but he obviously caught her and killed her. So she leaves the diner and she sees Gunn like getting pulled out of his car and he's alive. He's on the stretcher. And the deputies notice her and she's like, where's Grady? And one of Leo's waitresses had called for EMS, but like the police aren't over there for her. And she just tells them, I found a dead body. And they say, well, Grady was headed out towards the salvage yard. And she knows like, no, he's not. The salvage yard is like the last stop before out of town. And she knows he's making a break for it. And she tells them where to find Moira's body, and she runs to find Grady, but she goes all over town and he's gone. And they found his Bronco like abandoned a few towns over, and she's like super hurt knowing if even if he gets caught, like he'll never be brought back to this town because it's a small town. They won't hold a trial here. So she calls Sam to pick her up, and he comes on the motorcycle, and he says it's Halloween, and she tells him about like Grady and everything, and Sam and like she's like he got away, and Sam says, well, not exactly. On Halloween we can actually go anywhere as long as we're back by dawn. But they go back to the house, and like she sleeps, but when she wakes up, Moira's there, and she says she's sorry, but Moira says like, no, it's my fault. Like I knew what my dad was capable of, and I still called him to pick me up that night. And like there's a party going on downstairs with all the ghosts already. And she asks Moira like, do you remember? And she tells her yes. And she tells her basically like she had left because she saw Annie kissing Gunn, and she left with her dad, and he like touched her in the bed, and she didn't even know he left until she woke up and saw him coming back, and the headlight was out and her dad was like soaking wet. So she had basically called over to Annie's house, and Annie wasn't there, and she told Annie's brother to call 911. And she goes outside and asks her dad, like, did you kill her like you killed Katie? And then she ran to the shed, which he obviously followed her to, and he just came in and just point blank killed her. Like, didn't say one thing.
His own daughter.
His own daughter. Like, he didn't even know this person. And she says, like, that post on Instagram had actually been scheduled, like, in case anything happened. So it actually worked out. And she says it was like the more we grew up, the less he loved us. And she tells Annie, like, he didn't even lock that shed until he saw you come back. So he must have thought, like, maybe I would get up and come back too. And Moira says she knows where he is in Virginia, which is the same thing, like, the planchette had written out. And also, when she was asking about Katie, he says, have you been talking to your mom? So her mom knows Katie. There's something about her mom there. And she tells her, like, he's in a hotel, and she sees him, like, through the blood on his gun. And they go to the ballroom and tell everyone. And Annie asks Fern, like, did Sam really kill those girls? And Fern gets pissed off. And she goes, who have you been talking to? And she says, Sam didn't kill us. So, to clarify, Moira's mom actually figured out the whole thing with Katie as well. And she actually had accused her dad of killing her at some point in time. But she also lost a custody battle because she was going up against a police officer, and she was not even allowed to have contact with Moira, which is why she moved away to Virginia. Also, Moira had thrown the ring at Annie when they got in that fight when she saw her kissing Gunn, which is how Annie ended up with the ring. And Moira had basically called her mom prior to the whole confrontation with her dad, and her mom had said, like, just be careful with him, he's dangerous. So sorry if this audio sounds a little bit different. I had to re-record a segment of it. Back to where we were. So Fern says, I died in that barn with an axe to my chest, and believe me, it wasn't Sam. Fern just says, like, be careful who you talk to up here. There's a lot of snakes in this garden. And so Annie and Sam are going to take Sam's motorcycle to Virginia, and they are in Maryland, I believe. I wrote it down here in a second. And Moira says, make him tell you why. So they're in Maryland. So it takes about 3 hours for her to get there. So she calculates that they'll have like just enough time to like get there, do what they have to do. And as long as they leave by 4 a.m., they can be back at the house before the sunrise. And so she asks Sam, like, what happens if we don't get back by sunrise? And he says, like, I'm not really sure. And she's like, well, has anyone tried it? And he's like, I'm sure somebody has. And like, I don't want to find out, basically. And so she tells him, like, okay, well, we need to leave by 4 a.m. So they pull up to the hotel, and they find, like, an empty room to, like, get their thoughts together. And she says she has a plan. And so she just turns on, like, the water in the tub. And she says she'll give him the signal. And he's like, well, how will I know what the signal is? And she just says, like, well, if you don't get some kind of a signal and I don't come back, find me in the water. So Grady wakes up and he sees all this water like coming from the bathroom, and he like opens the door and quickly like the light blows out, but before it does, she knows he saw her like just laying in the bottom of the tub. And so he like is still looking, like trying to really see what he saw, but then he screams when he realizes that it's her, and he runs for his gun, and she asks, do you think that you can kill me again? And he said, I didn't kill you, you're not dead. And she says, shoot me. And he says, you think I won't shoot you? And she says, you did it to Moira. And he says he wasn't relieved when she came back because he thought he was finally done with all her bullshit. He says it was easier than he thought because no one even cared where you went. And he says he killed Moira because of her. He said everything was because of you. Do you think I always bought two of everything because I wanted you as a daughter? No, it was because she didn't want anything unless you had it too. Even when you were dead, she wanted to be just like you. And she grabs for the gun and he shoots her in the head, which was the signal she was trying to give Sam. And it just goes like right through her. So she's able to get him down and get on top of him. And like she can feel Codie's presence, and Codie is like showing him what he did to her. And Codie is saying, I thought they would never find me. My bones in the river. Why did you do this to me? And he's just saying, stop, stop. And Annie says, why did you kill me? And he says, the same reason as you. Talking to Codie, he says, someone had to teach you a lesson. Someone had to teach you a lesson. And he tries to start stabbing Annie again, and she kicks him in the chest, which like throws him back in the water because it's almost like filling up the room. And he like is falling in the water, trying to get up, and she circles him and like just drags him back under, and she just drowns him. She doesn't want to hear his excuses anymore. She doesn't want to hear anything else. She just drowns him. And she doesn't know how, but she knows this is the water from the river. So Sam comes in and he's like, it all went okay. And then she panics because she's like, oh my God, it's 5 o'clock. So they are racing home. They're short an hour. And as they're like flying, like it's almost like they have special speed. Some hellhounds like try to pull her off the bike, and they're like biting at them and chasing. And it does get a hold of her and starts pulling her down. But she looks up and like Sam is completely on fire, like even more than like the time they kissed. And he's able to like get the hellhounds back. And the sun is starting to rise, and they see the house, and the party is still going, and like Dawn hasn't like touched the house yet. So she like runs in, she's looking for Moira, and she tells her, basically your dad did it because our power made him feel weak. And she's like, did he really say that? And she like knows, like she doesn't need to clarify. And Moira says that she saved the last dance for her, and they're like dancing, and Annie knows like that she'll be gone before the music ends. And she's just like remembering her smell and everything about her friend. And she tells Moira, I'll try to reach you if you try to reach me. And when she opens her eyes, all of the ghosts are gone, but she knows she'll be there next Halloween and for forever as long as this house is still standing. All right. So what did you rate it?
I rated it 5 stars. Okay. I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
I'm doing a 4.5. So yeah, I think there's a couple like plot holes. But otherwise, like, yeah, it's fun. Like, it's a quick read, which I'm loving right now. Yes. But like, it is just fun, and like, but it also made me sad.
Yeah.
Like, especially, like, not to say that Annie didn't have her whole life, but especially like Moira, like she was going to like an Ivy League, like for your dad to just like, no remorse, just like kill you, like,
because she knew that not only did you kill Codie,
but you killed my
best friend,
who you also raised like a daughter. Like,
right.
That's insane. Like, that's absolutely insane. Like,
I couldn't imagine.
Yeah. No. Okay. Reviews?
Yes. So, the 5-star review will be mine.
Ooh. Love.
This is a darkly comical young adult mystery horror novel for the ages, akin to If I Spit on Your Grave meets King's Pet Cemetery, with an unlikable main character who is bent on avenging her own death by tracking down the person or persons who are directly responsible for her ending up dead in the mountains, rumored to resurrect the dead. Watch out, because Annie Lane is on a warpath and you don't want to get in her way.
Keely writes so well.
I try sometimes. 1 star. Absolutely filled with plot holes and inconsistencies and something. To the point that I initially gave this 2 stars, and I'm now down to 1 after recalling everything that didn't make any sense, some of which I'll go through below. But essentially, if you've read the title, you've read the best thing about this book. And I'm not going into all the...
Yeah. I mean, there's this plot holes, but I think it was like a fun read. But, we read for vibes, so...
Yeah.
There's that. Yeah. Okay. Well, whenever you guys are listening to this, I don't know what day of the week, but happy Halloween. Because it'll be Halloween before our next record. And our next record, we're going to continue a little bit more with one more spooky read. We are reading Jackal by Erin Adams.
Ooh, yes. I'm excited about that.
Have you read it?
Not yet.
Okay. Yeah. So we have one more. Also, so my mom really thinks we should do Blood and Ash.
Ooh, yeah.
Well, apparently, like, it's basically, she's like SJM, so she has, like, tons of series, and they all kind of interlink. So, I mean, if Keely's up with it, I guess that'll be our next big
I'm down.
one. Okay, so that'll be, like, February or March, whenever we finish Throne of Glass and, like, move into that. Obviously, like, as new SJM books come out, we will be reading those, but we are caught up, unfortunately. So, all right, well, that is all that we have, and we will talk to you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye.